Long, long ago, in a remote village along Japan's northeastern coast, there stood a humble collection of wooden huts huddled together like timid children bracing against the sea. The villagers were fisherfolk by tradition and by necessity, rising before the sun to cast their nets into dark, mysterious waters. Life there was resolute rather than prosperous. The catch of the day determined whether a community feast would be served or whether the villagers would go to bed with gnawing emptiness in their bellies. Neighbours shared meagre meals of rice and broth, bonded by the brine-scented air and the unspoken knowledge that the ocean both provided and destroyed. Fishermen often whispered about vengeful spirits roaming the coast at night, but no one dared address these tales openly. Fear of the unknown lingered beneath the surface of everyday routines, hovering like a pale moon over a storm-tossed sea. It was in this dense atmosphere of superstition and survival that a boy named Haruo grew into a young man. He was taught how to mend nets before he could recite his letters, and by the time he reached his adult years, his hands were forever rough from rope and salt. Haruo was neither the strongest nor the most admired fisherman, for he was an introvert who seemed more entranced by the moon's reflection on the waves than by the fish that might lie just beneath. But what he lacked in bravado, he made up for in a keen understanding of the sea's rhythms and an unwavering patience. He believed that each wave told a story, if only one listened closely enough. The coastline where Haru lived was known for its seaweed, which clung to the rugged rocks and drifted long miles offshore. Late into the night, the luminous strands of seaweed would glow with a soft, greenish hue whenever the moon was bright overhead. Local elders warned the villagers, never fish by moonlight alone. The ocean calls lost spirits to gather then, and you may catch more than fish. Growing up, Haru listened to these words with a mixture of fascination and caution. Still, curiosity stirred within him each time the moon rose and cast its shimmering path over the waves. One autumn, after summer storms had battered the village, the fishing stocks plummeted. Boats returned each day with pitiful hauls of battered mackerel and sprats too small to be worth much. The villagers' hopes were pinned on the occasional big catch, but nights came and went with minimal success. Many fishermen found themselves forced to stay ashore, fixing the splintered beams of their boats and scraping by on whatever reserves they had left. It was during this anxious season, as hunger began to creep into every household, that Haruo decided to sail at midnight. The older fishermen tried to dissuade him, repeating the old dire warnings about ghosts, but desperation had taken hold of the entire community. If he could return with a bounty from the sea, perhaps the rumors could be dispelled and his status in the village would improve. On the eve of his departure, Haruo readied his boat under lantern light. He had no family left. His parents had perished years before in a violent storm, and no one was there to stop him. Even so, he couldn't help recalling the tales of the living dead, how some claimed the ocean floor was a graveyard of drowned sailors who roamed at midnight, searching for vessels to drag under. Haruo's neighbours, though wary, had accepted his plan with a combination of dread and gratitude. Silently, they wished him luck, offering him small tokens. Dried rice cakes, a pouch of salt for protection, and an old talisman shaped like a fox's face, carved from driftwood. When Haruo pushed from the shore that first night, a heavy mist hung over the bay. He could barely tell sky from sea as his little boat creaked. The moon was almost full, yet still hidden behind a gauzy veil of clouds. Haruo anchored near the rocky outcrops known for harbouring schools of fish after storms. He cast his net carefully, minding each knot. Hours passed with only the faint slap of rippling water against the hull, and soon he felt the invisible weight of exhaustion pulling on his eyelids. Desperate for some sign, any sign, he peered out across the water. The ocean stared back, silent and indifferent. Just as Haruo was on the verge of packing up, he noticed a sickly glow ripple through the shallows. Leaning over the side, he saw that the strands of seaweed drifting in the current were giving off their usual pale luminescence. But the colour looked too vibrant, too alive. The water itself shimmered like a living tapestry of light. Compelled by curiosity, he cast his net again, letting it sink into the glowing waters. When he began to pull, it felt lighter than air. Then suddenly it became impossibly heavy, as though something huge had latched onto it. Haruo's arms strained visibly, and his heart pounded, adrenaline surging through his veins. At first he thought he had snared a large fish or a swirling mass of seaweed, but the net came up covered in whirls of seaweed that emanated an eerie, ghostly fluorescence. Tangled in its glowing fronds, he glimpsed something else. There, half submerged within the glowing net, was a face. It was a pale thing, neither jade nor ivory, but some pallid blend that bespoke no living warmth. The eyes were closed, as if in slumber or death, and seaweed curtains fell across the features like shrouds. Terrified, Haruo nearly dropped the net, but curiosity and a fisherman's instinct to secure his catch spurred him to heave upwards. The net spilled its contents onto the boat's floor with a heavy, echoing slap. The figure was not a fish, but a phantom-like human form, translucent yet disturbingly real, cloaked in ribbons of luminescent seaweed. Startled, Haru froze as he watched the spectre regain consciousness or something akin to it. Its eyes opened with a faint, otherworldly glow, setting Haru's heart pounding in terror. Summoning his nerve, he managed to stammer, Who are you?" The apparition said nothing. Instead, it seemed to survey the environment with mournful acceptance. Slowly, it raised a hand, which was so pale and almost shimmering with moonlit translucence. Then, in a gesture of unspoken plea, it reached out toward Haruo before dissolving into a swirl of phosphorescent water droplets. The seaweed glowed brighter for a moment, and then the entire form receded, as though seeping through the very wooden planks of the boat. Haruo stumbled back in horror, fumbling for the pouch of salt. By the time he found it, the spirit was gone, leaving only the faint glow of seaweed behind. He did not speak of this incident to anyone. Wordlessly, he returned to shore at dawn, his net empty of fish, heavy with confusion and fear. As the next few days wore on, villagers asked, "Did you catch anything?" Haruo only shook his head, avoiding their gaze. Each night he wrestled with himself. He wanted to abandon the midnight fishing, but an unsettling curiosity gnawed at him. What if that spirit was but one among many? Were these apparitions truly ghosts, or illusions, or something else entirely? On the third night, hunger and curiosity overcame him. Once again, he set sail under the moonlight, venturing farther out this time. The sea was calm in a deceiving, hypnotic way, and the water glowed with that same eerie radiance. With trembling hands, Haru cast his net. He waited, eyes scanning the horizon. Then, the net tugged violently. This time, he felt multiple struggles, like dozens of flailing fish, but heavier and stranger. He pulled, grunting with the strain, and dragged his net onto the boat's deck. Instead of fish, he found more seaweed, glowing in an unearthly hue, and enmeshed within it were several ghostly forms. They were blurred figures that flickered in and out of solidity, some wearing ancient robes reminiscent of centuries past, others draped in modern, tattered clothing. Each face bore an expression of deep sorrow, as though lamenting some unresolvable regret. The temperature in the boat dropped sharply. Haruo's breath fogged in the sudden cold, and the net writhed with quiet, plaintive murmurs as the spirits struggled helplessly against the binding seaweed. He watched, horrified yet transfixed. As a fisherman, he knew the pangs of an impossible catch, but never had he pulled living souls, or rather undead souls, from the depths. Overwhelmed by pity, Haruo decided to release them. He loosened the knots, letting the spectral shapes unravel. One by one, the ghosts rose, hovered briefly as if weighing their final regrets, and then dissipated into faint flickers of light before melting back into the sea. Left behind were swirling filaments of glowing seaweed, slowly dimming before Haruo's eyes. Still no fish. Still no food for the starved. Haruo returned home at dawn, weaving far-fetched excuses to the inquiring neighbors. Each subsequent night, something pulled him back to the sea, despite returning empty-handed every time. With each outing, the ghostly forms grew more numerous, their whispers more haunting in the midnight air. Whenever his net snagged one of these apparitions, he instinctively released it. The spirits bore no malice. They simply seemed adrift, trapped in the tides between life and death. But there was one spirit that appeared more frequently than the rest. A young woman, wrapped in a white funeral kimono. Her hair floated behind her like ink dissolving in water. She never spoke, but her gaze was filled with profound sorrow. Haruo began to sense that each time he encountered her, she carried the unfulfilled yearning of someone who had left the mortal realm too soon. He found himself waiting for her appearance, bracing for it. In time, he gathered the courage to address her directly. One night, he asked, "What keeps you here?" The spirit's form flickered as if battered by a gust of wind, and a faint whisper reached Haruo's ears. "The sea keeps what it steals." Her face faded, expression twisted in timeless despair. A strange pattern emerged. Each subsequent night, more and more ghosts appeared in his net. Beckoned perhaps by some unknown force, though terrified, Haruo felt oddly compelled to help them find some kind of release. He was, after all, a fisherman. Clearing the nets was second nature. In the hush of midnight, he would lay the net across the boat's deck and slowly peel away strands of glowing seaweed, freeing the spirits one at a time. Then, with silent gratitude, each phantom vanished into the night air, or was carried off by the tidal breath of the sea. Yet with each unearthly catch, physical fish became more elusive. It was as though the real fish in these waters had scattered, making room for the drifting souls. Word of Haruo's nightly excursions spread. Some mocked him as a fool chasing illusions, but others recalled the ancient legends with renewed fear or reverence. His lonely vigil continued, drawn by a sense of duty he couldn't fully explain. Perhaps he felt that by doing this he was righting some ancient wrong, or maybe he was bewitched by the sorrowful beauty of these spirits. Gradually, he slept less and lost interest in the mundane tasks of everyday village life, reserving his focus solely for the midnight journey. One night, the surge of ghosts in his net was colossal. He hauled in a twisting mass of seaweed that crackled with a bluish, spectral brilliance within it. A crowd of spirits thrashed, their lamentations filling the air with hollow wails. Some appeared as children, others as grim-faced soldiers donning ragged armor from eras long forgotten. Their voices merged into a wordless chorus that filled Haruo's mind with images of battles lost. Tsunamis that had swept entire families away. Storms that had claimed hundreds of lives. Pain, regret, and sorrow whirled in the boat like a tempest. Panicking, Haruo tried to cut the net and release them all at once, but the seaweed glowed fiercely, seemingly refusing to give up its captives. It was as though the sea had a will of its own, demanding something in return. Summoning courage from depths he didn't know he possessed, Haruo grasped the pouches of salt that villagers had given him and flung them over the writhing net, chanting a makeshift prayer of protection. He asked the spirits to find peace and passage to wherever they belonged, and begged the sea's forgiveness. Bit by bit, the salt crystals sizzled in contact with the glowing seaweed, creating small sparks of greenish light. As the net burned away, the spirits began to dissolve, fading into the air with sighs that resonated like distant waves. One figure, however, lingered. The young woman in the white funeral kimono. Standing at the edge of the boat, she gazed at Haruo with a gentle sorrow. Her lips parted, almost forming words, but through the cold hush of night, just a faint breath emerged. "Will you hear my story?" Despite the roaring pulse in his ears, Haruo nodded. The woman drifted closer, her hair fluttering in an unseen current. She told him, not in direct speech but through images that seized Haruo's mind, of how she had been betrothed to a young man in a distant clan. Their families arranged the match so the clans might unite during a time of war. Although they never truly loved each other, she set sail to meet her fiancé across the sea, but the boat was caught in a monstrous storm. The crew drowned, and her body was never found. The sea had stolen her life, preventing even a proper funeral. Trapped between worlds, her soul wandered the tides, tethered by sorrow and unfulfilled vows. Seeking redemption, Haruo offered her the fox-face talisman he carried. He had taken it from the village as a token of protection, and it was said to guide lost souls home. With a trembling hand, he pressed the carved fox face against her chest, or where her chest would be if she were alive. Slowly, her translucent form stabilized, the flicker of her presence growing steadier. She looked at him with an expression of gratitude and longing. Then an otherworldly shimmer surrounded her, and she faded into the air like a reflection lost in disturbed water. Haruo collapsed onto the deck, heart pounding and tears staining his cheeks. After that night, the ghostly appearances decreased. Weeks passed, and though the nights were still lit by the same fickle moon, the nets stopped dragging in souls from the depths. For the first time in months, Haruo caught fish abundant, shimmering schools of snapper, and even the rare and coveted tai. Word reached the village quickly. Grinning fishermen soon joined him in the midnight waters, venturing together as they realized the curses of old seemed lifted. Each returning boat came back with a bounty, fueling a collective relief that felt like a festival. People danced on the shore, children feasted on fresh seafood, and the gloom that once pervaded the village lifted, like morning fog under a rising sun. Still, something weighed on Haruo's mind. He often caught glimpses of glowing seaweed washing up on the shore at low tide, but whenever he reached for a strand, it would crumble into blackened flakes. He felt as though a part of himself remained out at sea, drifting with the spirits he had encountered. Late into the evenings, he found himself quietly wandering the beach, searching the horizon for any signs of the phantom figures, and especially that white-robed woman who had beckoned him to listen to her story. Sometimes he even heard faint whispers carried on the wind, though when he looked around, nobody was there. One day, an elder approached him as he sat mending nets by the docks. The wrinkles on her face formed a web of stories as ancient as the sea itself, and her voice was tinged with quiet wisdom. "We have heard of your midnight deeds," she said. "They say you freed many souls from the sea's grasp. Do you know what that means for you?" Haruo shook his head, both afraid and curious. The elder pressed a small lacquer box into his hands. "Once you cross the boundary that divides life from death," she explained, "it becomes your burden to guide lost souls. This was told to me by my grandmother, who was said to have freed a spirit many decades ago. The sea is grateful, but it also never forgets." Inside the box was a tiny polished mirror that seemed to reflect not just Haruo's face, but shapes and figures behind him, through spot forms that flickered in the corners of the reflection. Realizing its significance, Haruo felt a chill crawl up his spine. The elder continued, "If ever you feel drawn too far into that world, use this mirror to remember who you are. But do not fear your gift, for it can bring peace to those in need." A year passed. The fishing village flourished. Neighbors built sturdier huts. Children ran about with full bellies, and festival drums echoed across the coastline on moonlit nights. Yet Haruo still went sailing at midnight, though not as often. The spirit encounters occurred now and then, like fleeting memories. He would find the occasional ghost tangled in the radiant seaweed, always gently cutting away the glowing nets to release them. But each encounter was marked by less anguish and more gratitude. The spirits didn't linger to lament lost dreams anymore. Instead, they seemed relieved at the chance to return to where they belonged. And each time, Haruo felt the mirror within the lacquer box grow just a little warmer, as though collecting fragments of soul's gratitude. Over time, mysterious stories of Haruo's role spread beyond the village. Traders and travelers came seeking to witness firsthand the fisherman who reeled in specters from the sea. Some believed he was a priest, others thought he was cursed, and still others claimed he was blessed by a benevolent sea deity. Haruo shrugged off their questions, uninterested in fame. He found solace in continuing his quiet routine, content to combine a fisherman's livelihood with a midnight calling that transcended human understanding. Late one autumn, a traveling samurai arrived with a small retinue. He had heard rumors of a fisherman able to commune with spirits and insisted that Haruo accompany him on a nighttime voyage. The samurai's intentions were unclear. Did he seek to rid himself of a personal haunting, or was it merely a curiosity? Haruo agreed, albeit reluctantly, sensing that this man bore some heavy burden. That night, the two went out under the waning moon, the samurai stoic and silent. A single guard rowed alongside them in a small skiff to bear witness. Haruo's net glowed faintly, as it often did when ghosts were near. After several hours, an unease settled in. The samurai clenched his jaw, as though wrestling with unspoken demons. A wave of phosphorescent seaweed glistened in the water. Haruo cast his net, tension coiling in his muscles. When he pulled it in, it was filled with tangled ribbons of seaweed, illumined by the same eerie glow. Others might have panicked, but Haruo felt only the familiar hush of expectation. Soon, a phantom emerged from the net, its features contorted in rage and grief. The figure was clad in the tattered remnants of a retainer's garb, and it glared straight at the samurai. The samurai turned pale. His guard crossed himself in terror, nearly dropping his oar. Haruo sensed that this ghost held a personal vendetta. The phantom howled with a voice that seemed to echo from a cavern of anguish. "You betrayed me." To Haruo's shock, the samurai knelt on the deck, trembling like a child. Through ragged whispers, he confessed to orchestrating a plot that cost the retainer's life. In order to claim a coveted position, sweat beaded on the samurai's forehead as if his sins boiled to the surface. Haruo carefully unwound the seaweed, releasing the spirit's arms, which shook in fury. The ghost locked eyes with the samurai, as if torn between vengeance and the peace offered by the fisherman's intervention. Recalling the advice of the elder and remembering his role, Haruo produced the small mirror. He held it up so that the ghost could see itself, a reflection of its pain and anger, the final tether that kept it bound to hatred. Gazing into the mirror, the spectre's features twisted into a grimace before softening into resignation. Then the ghost closed its eyes, and a swirl of pale light enveloped it. In one final lament, it vanished, leaving behind strands of lifeless seaweed that slid off the deck with a quiet plop. The samurai pressed his forehead to the boat's floor and wept, grappling with remorse. Although he left at dawn without word or thanks, Haruo believed that man's life had been irrevocably altered by facing the truth he had buried. Seasons continued to turn, and each passing year brought new stories. Some ghosts arrived weighed down by regrets, others by frustration or anger. Regardless of their circumstances, Haruo would free them, yet these nightly labors never brought him real wealth. He remained a modest fisherman, content to help fill the village's larders when the seas were forgiving. The people of the village no longer worried about curses. Children laughed at the notion of ghosts in glowing seaweed, calling them Haruo's friends in innocent jest. Elders, however, took the matter seriously, as they recognized that Haruo bore a spiritual responsibility that few would ever comprehend. They respected him and occasionally left offerings at a small shrine near the dock, a gesture of thanks to the protector who had somehow warded away malevolent forces. Though he found meaning in his task, Haruo's heart sometimes ached with loneliness. Others saw him as different, neither fully immersed in the realm of the living, nor belonging to the realm of the dead. Now and then he would dream of the white-robed spirit he had first encountered, remembering the touch of the fox-faced talisman against her ghostly form. He wondered where she had gone. Had she passed on to a distant shore far beyond mortal sight, or did her spirit still wander through moonlit dreams? In the hush of the night, he would feel a gentle breeze ruffle his hair and wonder if it was her essence, checking to see if he was well and truly at peace. On the anniversary of that first ghostly encounter, Haruo made a small offering at the water's edge: a bowl of sake, fragrant incense, and a row of salt crystals. He knelt by the curling tide under the full moon, silently thanking the spirits for the understanding they had given him. Waves lapped gently, almost as if in acceptance. Then, for an instant, he caught sight of a faint shape standing at the periphery of his vision. A woman in pale robes, smiling. When he turned, she was gone, leaving behind only the delicate scent of jasmine. Yet to Haruo, that fleeting presence was enough. It reminded him he was not alone, that his gift was a bridge rather than a barrier. Time continued its eternal flow, and Haruo grew older. But the midnight fisherman's legacy endured as a living legend. Generations later, villagers would recount the myth of how one man had reeled in not fish but spirits, tangled in glowing nets of seaweed. Children repeated the story around bonfires on cold evenings, voice quavering with excitement. Some concluded that he had a pact with dragons beneath the waves. Others claimed he was a fallen star. Yet all agreed the moral of his tale was compassion. We never know what burdens others carry, in life or beyond it, and we can choose to help untangle them or leave them trapped. By releasing ghosts from their seaweed bonds, Haruo had not merely ended their suffering, he had also proven that empathy shines brightest in the darkest hours. And so, in that solitary boat on moonlit nights, Haruo continued his nocturnal fishing. Still of modest means but rich in spirit, he drifted where the water was calm, letting the luminous strands guide his net. Sometimes he caught only fish, and sometimes he pulled up the remains of old nets, rusted swords, and shattered pieces of boats from centuries past. But every so often, he would discover a spectre hidden within the shining seaweed, waiting for release. He never recoiled, never hesitated. He would gingerly peel away the glowing threads, letting the ghostly presence slip free. As it vanished into the darkness, Haruo would close his eyes and offer a silent prayer for safe passage and final rest. That was how he found his purpose, a life of quiet heroism. In each haunted face, he saw the universal longing for peace. In each tear shed, he recognized an echo of his own losses, his parents, his unspoken desires, the heartbreaks he never named. All of it became threads in a larger tapestry, woven by night and tide. To the outside world, it might seem a lonely path, but Haruo felt less alone with each spirit he aided. Day by day, the fisherman came to understand. Sometimes, the greatest catch is not one of silver fish, but of souls yearning for release, born on seaweed's glow beneath a watchful moon. In the end, rumor says that on a certain night, Haruo's boat was found drifting empty at dawn. No net, no fisherman. It is said he was claimed by the sea in a final gesture that both honored his devotion and fulfilled his calling. Whether his spirit joined those he had assisted or passed into a land beyond even their domain, the villagers could not say with certainty. They whispered that, if you sail out at midnight under the full moon and the water shimmers with ghostly light, you might see Haru standing at the prow of his boat. Or perhaps you'll spot his small form silhouetted by phosphorescent seaweed, still doing what he did best, untangling the regrets that bind lost souls, guiding them home. And maybe, just maybe, if you listen closely, you'll hear the soft echo of his voice, consoling them with a compassionate promise. In the face of fear and sorrow, one kind act can illuminate the darkest waters and forge a path to peace for those adrift.